Hi everyone, it's Vaishali from Caragena Conversations, and here I am today with Rebecca, who is an undergrad at Berkeley and also is a teaching assistant at CS 88.
Thanks for having me.
So, Rebecca, what specific goals and aspirations drive the service work you engage in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I'm really interested in like teaching and specifically like CS education. And ever since I was like little, I like really enjoyed school. And I think the more I've grown up, the more I've realized like how important education is as like not just because like I personally think learning is fun and cool, but also it's like, it's a path for like socioeconomic mobility. So I think it's like really important for people to, get educated, be able to like get the jobs that are like high paying and can, help them move up in society and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool. And then the other thing that I really enjoy when I'm teaching is like the connections that I make with my students. So kind of like getting to know them more personally, and also just kind of like being like a cheerleader for them because I know especially for like data science or computer science, it can be very daunting for some people. Like, the work is really hard, the courses are really hard. And so there's a lot of like imposter syndrome that can sometimes happen. And I want to just kind of like push back against that and be like, you belong in this field.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with coding and mathematics, especially how have you seen more representation throughout the classroom for like women and minorities?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think that's super important, right? I think for Berkeley, I was a little bit worried when I accepted like, my offer to like go to Berkeley as undergrad because I had heard all these things about, how cutthroat it was academically. And I was also really worried about not having like, women in STEM. But I think like in terms of admissions to the major, I think Berkeley is definitely like improving in terms of like gender ratios.
Mm.
But I think a lot of work still needs to be done on like the course staffing levels because I feel like for a lot of lower division classes, for instance, like I teach a lower div, and I think like the representation on staff is like relatively balanced by like gender. But then like depending on what kind of field you go into after that, and for like the upper division classes, it starts to get a little bit more um, looking like one particular demographic. And so yeah, I'd love to see more kind of like initiatives or like encouragement for like women or like other minorities to kind of like fill these positions because I think like representation is super important. Like if you don't see someone who looks like you, like who is like in a position of like authority or power, like a TA, then it can seem like, oh, maybe this isn't for me when actually it totally can be.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Could you share like a deeply personal or impactful story that really inspired your involvement?
Yeah, I think there was one TA that I had, my first TA, I suppose, like when I took CS 621A, which is like the usually like one of the first computer science courses that you would take as like a CS or EECS major. And his name was Chris. And at the very start of the semester, he kind of like, prepared us and was like, 621A, a lot of people find it like really difficult. But if I can like go through 621A and get like a C. Like he just like straight up told us that he didn't get like that good of a grade in the class, and yet he was still, like a TA teaching the course, and I learned a lot from him as well and had a great time in his section. So I think that was like really inspiring to me as like to like know that even if I struggle, that doesn't mean that like I'm not like fit for the major or like I don't belong. And I think it also kind of cemented like my teaching philosophy, I guess, which is one that's like very student centered, very like encouraging. I think like as a TA, because you're in like such a position of like authority and like students look up to you, it really does matter like what you say and how you say things. So doing like little things like, oh, like that was a great question, or even if they don't answer the question like completely correctly, if you can like acknowledge what they did understand correctly, like that can be like super important to like affirm them. So yeah, I think that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially, kind of like I think like teachers have a big impact on, a student's really like aspiration for their career. So I remember when I was in sixth grade, I had a teacher who would be like, you got to work on your writing abilities. And, then I took AP English in high school. So I was like reflecting on that. So I feel like, I guess, what has been the role of a mentor in your life?
Yeah, yeah. I think I've been really lucky in a sense that pretty much all of the teachers that I have had, I feel like they've had some kind of like positive impact on me. There's a couple that stand out. I think when I was in middle school, my seventh grade math teacher, Miss McSween, I don't know if she's still teaching, but I should like reach out to her. But she was like really great for a variety of reasons. I think she was very like personable as a teacher or like approachable. I always felt like I could like ask her questions and she had a great sense of like dry humor, and I think she really like again put her students first, right? So like one example of how she did that was we would kind of like do these like problems of the day and then we would like teach each other. So like we would attempt the problems and then we would take turns kind of like presenting the problem to our fellow students. And I think that kind of helped us, take responsibility for like our own learning and then also practice that like math skills by like teaching other people. And whenever she wrote like quizzes or tests, she would always like incorporate us, like our names into the problems, which I thought was really funny. For instance, like I had these two friends who were also in the same class, but in a different period. And they were named Sasha and Nikita. And they were kind of known for like bickering, but like in a friendly manner, right? And so, like, for one of the quiz questions, Miss McSween wrote, like, Nikita and Sasha are arguing over a math problem. Like, Sasha says this and Nikita says this. Which one is right and why? And so that was like kind of fun to see that, she really cared about us. And then another fun thing she did for like quizzes was she was a big Golden State Warriors fan. And she had like a little like Golden State Warriors shrine in like her class in like one corner. And so we would almost always have like an extra credit question that was related to the Warriors, that was like totally unrelated to math, which I thought was also like pretty fun that like, not everything has to be serious like 100% of the time, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I remember from Miss McSween that I really loved was one time I brought my guitar on campus. I don't remember why. I think I was just like for fun or something. But then she saw that I had brought a guitar, and then she was like, "Rebecca, do you want to serenade our class as everyone does the problem of the day in the first like 15 minutes?" And I was like, "Sure." So yeah, I just like played guitar for a bit. So that was like quite nice. So yeah, I think like treating people like humans, and like caring about them is very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially as teachers, right? There may be like some teachers who are just like, giving out busy work and all that. And
Mm,
then there's like other teachers who are there to really change someone's life. Because
yeah.
I think realizing the impact that they have can really, help society in a way. So I know I had an experience like tutoring kids, and it's been like, it's such a nice journey when you see someone develop from, from like one point to like maybe like reaching the heights. So, when reflecting on all of the service work that you do, what are some of the most formidable challenges you've encountered, whether it be in college or high school? Maybe it was through your leadership or any other like service organization that you've worked on, and have you navigated through them?
Yeah, another great question. And it's actually kind of funny. We should maybe talk about this because how we met actually is through a
Yeah.
tutoring organization when we were both in high school, which is Code for Tomorrow. So if anyone is not familiar with that, it's a student-run 501(c)(3) nonprofit, and we, during the height of COVID, we had a bunch of like virtual coding classes. And as far as I know, I think they're still happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of just lurk in the Code for Tomorrow Discord, but it makes me very happy to see that it's still
Yeah,
there.
it's a big community actually. I think it's like I think it's a great way for people to, get access to like really good resources. And especially if you're, anyone listening to this, if you're starting off as like a 12 or 13-year-old, like I feel like and like AI is the next big thing and learning just basics of programming will help so much.
Yeah, for sure. It's like really teaching like life skills. So
Yeah.
yeah, very, very cool. Um, but yeah, I guess you were also mentioning like any other like things that I've worked on. So
Yeah.
aside from TAing, I also, have continued my like volunteering for like tutoring on the side. So there's a club on campus on UC Berkeley that's called Computer Science Mentors or CSM, and we serve around like 1,000 students in total every semester across like CS, EECS, and data science lower division courses. And so I joined CSM as a junior mentor for CS 88, the same class that I TA for now. And I think it was like a really fun experience to not only develop like pedagogically, but also like find a community of other people who were also very interested in teaching and care a lot about like CS education and data science education. So that was really cool. And eventually I like, worked my way up to be one of the course coordinators who are kind of like, there's two of them per course and they kind of just like run the whole show, essentially. And so I think like, being a leader in that capacity and also the kind of like semesters that I've been a head TA for CS 88 and also last semester I was a head TA for Data 101. I think those have taught me like mostly like various like leadership skills. So I think like one of them is like time management. I kind of think of time management in like two separate ways. Like one of them is like time management of my own personal life, because being a head TA or being like a course coordinator, it's usually around like 20 hours or more of work per week. And so that can get kind of intense if you're also doing, like 12 plus units of classes, you're doing research, and then you're also trying to like have a life and like touch grass outside.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like what I've learned there is kind of like I think this is the case for a lot of people who go into like kind of like social work or like work for like social good is that like you obviously are like very passionate and you care about these things and you want to help everyone, but then at the same time you also have to remember to like take care of yourself and like avoid getting like burnt out. So even if like I think what I've learned over the years is like if it's like 12 a.m. and there's like a bunch of ed questions. So ed is like the course Q&A forum that we use. So um like maybe I should just go to sleep instead of like answering the ed questions because they're still going to be there, and the students will still appreciate your answer, even if it's like the next morning as opposed to like late at night, right? So, just kind of like preventing yourself from, burning out is good. And then there's also like the time management aspect of being a teacher. So when I like teach my lab or like discussion sections each week, obviously I don't have like an unlimited amount of time. So making sure that I can like get through the material that is most important. And then also if I'm helping people during office hours, right? Like on one hand, I want to make sure that if I'm helping someone that they feel like they have enough like information to like work on the problem on their own once I leave. But I also want to make sure that if the queue is like really long, that I don't, spend too much time on like helping one person and I get to help like everyone else who is in line too because they have been waiting for a while. So yeah, I think it's like a delicate balance. Um, and then I think the other thing that I've learned being in these kind of like leadership positions is like how to kind of like talk to people or manage people. So I put manage in like air quotes because I feel like a good manager in quotes is like someone who doesn't necessarily see them as like being above everyone else. Or like I don't really think that I'm necessarily like better than anyone else. I think I'm just like in a position to like facilitate how things are organized and kind of like coordinate everyone. So yeah, I think it's best when you kind of empower people to like do the work and like learn how to do the work rather than trying to like micromanage people. And also micromanaging is like exhausting and no one wants to do that. So
I
yeah, I think
completely
like
agree. I
yeah.
think like, with micromanaging, I feel like it could also lead to so many like conflicts and,
Hmm.
a lot of extra burnout just from,
Yes, yeah.
arguing and everything. And I feel like as leaders, right? Like especially once you enter the workforce, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like understanding this skill, right? Like, a leader is supposed to help enhance the team, right? They're
Exactly.
supposed to get things done. So, I mean, I experienced it this year as well. I organized the Berkeley Bazaar, so it was like it was hectic. It was a pretty big event, but like I think as you mentioned, right? Like really it's all about getting the work done, right? That's the end
Yes.
result. So I feel like having a title or position shouldn't really like affect, like the progress of the team.
Hmm.
So I guess like, like reflecting on that, what do you think are key aspects of leadership and communication that, people should try to work on and also develop as better entrepreneurs or maybe like just, maybe for interviews.
Yeah, for sure. I think like you kind of already touched on this, but like communication is a big deal. I think I am a Slack addict, and on core staff we, communicate over Slack mainly, and then we also have like weekly staff meetings. So I think kind of like being on top of things and maybe erring on the side of like over communicating, rather than under communicating, I think is generally better. And being as like transparent as possible, when it comes to like when things need to be done, or like who needs to do the thing, like being specific about, if there's like an action item, like who's doing it and when does it have to be done. The other thing is kind of just like organization. If there's like a staff meeting, I know that like, everyone is a student and sometimes we might have a class at that time that conflicts, or like you have to go to a research lab meeting. So having like kind of like recaps afterward on Slack and being like at channel, here's what we talked about today and here are the action items, is like goes a long way too. I think another thing that's important about being a leader is kind of like having patience and empathy, which I think also like is a skill that you need to be a good teacher. But what I mean in terms of like leadership specifically is that, because we're all students and we're all people, sometimes things come up. Like you might have a midterm that week, or I don't know, maybe you were in a long-term relationship and then like your significant other broke up with you or something, right? Like sometimes there are weeks that are harder than others. And I think a good leader is someone who like empathizes with that, is like approachable enough that someone is like comfortable to like say things that are like troubling them, or like at least say like, oh, I'm having like a tough week right now, can we, pivot to like something else, or like maybe can we like delegate my work to someone else,
Yeah.
is good. And having like the foresight of knowing that things don't always go to plan, for whether it's like in your control or out of your control. So like planning accordingly. Like whenever I make like a timeline, for instance, of all the things that we have to do to prepare for like the midterm exam, right? Making sure that there's enough like breathing room in between like deadlines, so that if something does go wrong, that like, it's not the end of the world and we have like a few days to fix it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think especially as students, right? Like being involved in so many like mentorship roles and like leadership opportunities, I feel like, we might also get burnt out. So I feel
Yeah.
like, as you mentioned before, self-care, right?
Yes.
So, as leaders, self-care is also very essential, right?
Yeah.
Taking care of your well-being will help you accelerate like this path that you took.
Yes.
And it not only helps you now, but also helps you, approach people better, right? If you're
Yeah.
starting off maybe with a small business or like maybe you want to start a small like project, like and you need people. So, just starting small and then really, understanding other people, as you mentioned, like listening to them, talking about what they need and all that. So I feel like that would be a great like way to express like their point of view. And then also I feel like you also touched on it, like resilience, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like building resilience, as you mentioned with the relationships and everything that's going on in personal life, I think really getting that skill is required, right? For many students. I know like the high achievers and yeah, who knows what, but Yeah, I guess how what are your thoughts on how to build resilience?
Yeah, I think one of the other like kind of skills of a leader that I think is important that helps to build resilience is making sure that you're kind of like structuring your team in such a way that people feel empowered to make decisions and, contribute to the processes that the team does on like kind of a meta level. So, I guess an example of this is like for meeting agenda notes, I mean, like, because I'm one of the head TAs, I kind of like, I add to the meeting agenda notes, but I also make sure to tell people like who are even like tutors or like 8 hour TAs who aren't, technically responsible for this, that if they see, anything that they want to talk about of how we could maybe improve the way core staff runs, or if they have any like pedagogical tips, that they should add, like, feel free to like add to the meeting notes and we can talk about it, right? Or recently, one of the problems that I have observed in my semesters on core staff is that because staff are like undergrads, eventually they graduate, and when people graduate, they take the knowledge with them, unfortunately. And so having some kind of like writing documentation on like how do we set up exam logistics, how does the course website work, how do we make and release assignments is like super important. So one of the things that I did when I first became head TA for CS88 was like having like a formal onboarding, slideshow presentation for like all of the new staff. And then also, like I said, like writing the documentation. One of the things that I've also added this semester is I've noticed that like almost all of the TAs, except for like two of them this semester, are graduating seniors. And so that, yeah, so that concerned me a lot. And so I kind of messaged all of the tutors on Slack and I was like, hey, like obviously this is like not required because they already have their own work done. But like if you're curious and you want to learn more about how like course infrastructure is developed, because it's a huge code base. It's like several gigabytes of code of like how the website works. Um, I was like join this channel and I can like add you to the GitHub like pull request reviews so that you can see how like the TAs who do know how the website works, like you can learn how they develop content or how the website works so that next semester when we all graduate, the course isn't gonna fall apart. So yeah, I think that's a big part of like resilience is kind of like lifting up
Yeah.
those
Like
around you.
head,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
really thinking of the future and planning.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think also like, like I like decals, right? Like a few of them get shut down as well.
Yeah.
It's prevalent at Berkeley. So I feel like, just planning ahead, especially this can go with a lot of different propositions, like maybe like starting new ventures in like different industries or maybe just like new jobs, right? So I think planning ahead would be a great skill to have. And, as you mentioned through your work, what novel approaches has it embraced to confront the complex issues or adversities, which you originally mentioned with minorities, and then also like how to promote this leadership skills?
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of touched on this just a moment ago, but to kind of flesh it out a little bit more, when I first became a TA for CS88 in fall 2023, so it's been a minute, um, the it was like rather unfortunate that I think the core staff was run like not super well in a sense that like during staff meetings we would kind of like have a lot of small talk, but then not have enough time to actually like do the work that was needed in order to run the course. So one of the big like problems that occurred during that semester was our midterm was kind of a disaster. So for context, if you're not aware, CS88 usually has the TAs write the exam problems, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, if you write an exam from scratch and then call it a day, it's probably not going to be like polished, right? Like maybe you'll have typos, or maybe like your solution is not like the correct one or something like that. And so that happened a lot in the midterm that semester, and I felt so bad for the students because every like 10 minutes during the exam we were like announcing clarifications, which is like, TA speak for sorry, we had a typo in this and it needs to be corrected. Um, yeah, and we also got a lot of feedback from students in like the mid-semester feedback form that was like super stressful for people, right? Because like if you're taking an exam, you want to be able to
Yeah.
focus and not have to worry about, typos in the problem that you're currently doing. So I think like one of the things that I really was important to me when I became a head TA the semester after that was setting up like a process of like, okay, like 5 weeks before the midterm or something, like we start writing the problems. Then the week later, everyone like reviews each other's problems and then have like multiple like cycles and iterations of that. And also writing the documentation, which didn't exist before then, of like, how do you actually write an exam question? Because we have like this thing called exam tool, and it's like markdown, but like a different variation of markdown code. So you also have to like, aside from the pedagogical like things that you have to learn when you're writing an exam question, you also have to learn like the syntax of like how to write the question too. So I think that was something that I think helped a lot in the spring 24, the semester after that, with making the midterm like much more smooth. And then another thing that I worked on that I guess I haven't talked about yet is I do research, like CS education research, with Professor Lisa Yan, and then also occasionally Professor Michael Ball, who also teaches CS 88. And one of the things that I did with them this past summer through something that is called Seamless Learning, which is kind of like this overarching initiative for improving like course infrastructure across like Berkeley courses, is making a website template called Berkeley Class Site that is like, more modern and also most importantly like web accessible. Because like if you imagine if you're like visually impaired, for instance, navigating a website can be difficult, especially if like, because like for CS courses at Berkeley, everyone kind of has their own like website interface, right? And so that can be sometimes like not very accessible to people with, disabilities. And so an important part of making the Berkeley class site template was adding these kind of like web accessibility checks using like GitHub Actions in order to like verify whether the website like adheres to accessibility standards. So that was also, super important.
Definitely. And I think, with, with people of, minorities, as you mentioned, with disabilities and everything, um, it also kind of like reflects on, like us, right? Because like to provide more opportunity, like it's really acceptance, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
I think that's a big thing, that, especially in STEM education, and, CS and data science, two of the most high paying careers in like, in US and other countries. So I feel like, yeah, it's a great project to work on, and especially like helping out the underserved populations would really enhance society better. So, drawing from your own journey, what invaluable insights or pearls of wisdom would you impart to individuals who would want to continue this path of, helping others, whether it be through mentorship, leadership, or, research?
Yeah, that's great. I think I also kind of touched on this already, but like making sure to take care of yourself, So I think I have a very busy schedule. My Google Calendar is sometimes very filled and shocking to people when I show them. But I think the ways that I kind of like keep myself sane and happy and like, mentally healthy is making sure to spend time with like family and friends. Like and like actually like carve out that time, like that you should treat, taking care of yourself as if it's another like work task almost, right? Because you have to be unproductive to be productive. Yeah, even if that sounds like kind of counterintuitive. And then the other thing about teaching specifically that I have realized over time is teaching is like a performance art almost, right? Like you have to practice it a lot. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get it right. And sometimes you won't always be perfect, which is like totally fine. We're all humans. But I think it's also like super important to like be intentional and remember that students will remember how you treat them much more than like you remembering you like interacting with the student, if that makes sense. Because like as a
Yeah.
teacher, you probably interact with like 30 to like 50 to maybe even 100 students depending on like if you're a head TA or not. And so I think it's like super important to be aware of like your words and to try to be as like inclusive as possible and remember like what it feels like to be a student, because I think like whenever I've had teachers that I didn't like that much, it was usually because they were, you know, kind of like cold or distant, or they like gave too much work that was like not super relevant. And I think that kind of goes to show that they are kind of like very distant from what it felt like to be a student. So trying
Yeah.
to like again like go back to the empathy point.
And
Um,
also organization skills, right? As I think it's
yeah,
important as a teacher because students can get confused too. So I feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
once the teacher is organized, students get organized, and it's a structured based class. So
Yes,
I feel like that's also a really important skill.
yes, for sure. Yeah. I think the last thing that I would say is for any kind of like social work or like, you know, social good work, it can often feel very like undervalued and underappreciated, especially in terms of like the monetary aspect of it sometimes, or like, you know, the grind, or like, you know, I've definitely had some students not necessarily tell me directly, but I've kind of like lurked around like students and have been like, oh, like this TA was like super mean to me or something, or like the TAs don't understand, or like, you know, sometimes you get like comments from people, and I think it's like useful to know that what you're doing is important, and sometimes you might not always get it right,
Mhm.
but there are people who definitely like appreciate what you do, and I've definitely, you know, like even though teaching can sometimes feel like a lot of work and like sometimes it can feel very stressful, it's also super rewarding whenever I like run into former students, and they say like, hi, like thank you so much for being like a great like GSI. So I mean that even happened to me yesterday actually. So which is like super cool, and one of the reasons why I have kept doing this.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful, rewarding experience once, your students really appreciate, what you've been teaching them. Because I know, like, I mean, I'm a freshman, but I really enjoy like my English classes so far because it's been really interesting. We've been talking a lot about philosophy and having really engaging discussions as well. So I feel like it's really about how the teacher kind of like, structures the class and how engaging, as you mentioned, it is for the student. So, yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for being here today and engaging in this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it was great talking to you.